give me 1 second, Chelsea. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Now coming in again. Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Antonio. How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Good stuff. Good to speak to you. How are things?
It's good over here.
Right, okay, good stuff. I'm glad that you managed to join in and enable your microphone. I think sometimes a simple restart can fix the gravest of issues. So,
Yeah.
we are recording at this moment, so looking at starting a new unit. I know there are a couple of units that we've covered in the past with Anjum and with Phil. So today we're going to start off with events management. I think in the part of the course that you guys have covered so far, let's look at a quick recap in terms of units covered very briefly. So in the level 4, so you've covered units like tourism, basically everything is THM. So you've covered business management, understanding the essence of where and how business is driven within the tourism and hospitality sector. Then you've gone into a bit of marketing and customer service, which explains the 4 P's, how they relate to THM, tourism, hospitality and management sector or as an industry. You've done a bit of accounting and finance, things like sources of finance, interpretation of financial statements. You've done how maybe, I think, looking at the context, there must have been some section related to how finance is used to make take business decisions. The academic and professional development is a bit of a strange unit, which I think, these guys have included. This normally is a unit more or less related to HR. But nevertheless, I think in this unit, you must have covered, I think, things related to PDP, personal development plan, I think, maybe things related to, let's have a quick look. I think this is the one which Phil has covered. So you've looked at basically your styles, learning styles like work, kinesthetic, auditory, visual. You've done a bit of SWOT or, analysis in terms of your strengths and weaknesses to look at developing a PDP and how, obviously, what skills and, traits are required to actually work within this sector. So some bit of it is a bit of an awkward part, which has been included in this course, but will go along with what OTHM has said. And then I think towards the end, what we're looking at is we're coming to a circle, kind of a full circle, wherein it is looking like that we need to look at events management. There is an important, very important role events play in the THM sector, tourism, hospitality sector in particular. And we'll discuss that. I think it's directly related to one of the topics they've asked in task 1.3. And then towards the end, what we look at is how this sector is actually developing, evolving, keeping in mind the 21st century and, with travel becoming more economic, the world becoming shorter, people are able to travel quite a lot because of the economic prosperity and how in general the, developments are happening within this sector. So just coming back to the focus on this particular unit, which is events management, I think one of the reasons why we look at studying events management in tourism and hospitality sector is that there are a couple of reasons. So let's look at overarching one or two. First reason that I can think of is that when we travel, I think we tend to travel because of certain occasions. When we travel because obviously there are various reasons. But I think in general, when you travel as a family, you normally look at occasions, you look at events, and you look at, in general, let's put it this way, another word for events and occasions would be look at, celebration of certain events that you do, which could be personal, it could be business related, or it could be a mix of both personal and professional. The other thing that we see why events is important within this industry is that sometimes when you have to do meetings, trainings, conferences, and you have to look at a large gathering of people coming together. It takes the format of an event wherein you have to get all the people together from all different various sectors of the organization, countries or geographies and things like that. And that at some stage again becomes a collective wherein you have to call it an event because you have people coming in from different destinations or different places to participate with a common goal of understanding something. The other thing that I can think of at the top of my head would be sometimes you end up traveling because you're celebrating special occasions, things like anniversaries, birthdays, and what you want to be able to do is to make it memorable. You try and kind of fall back onto events, simple events that we do on a day-to-day basis, on the weekends or maybe on a get-together is maybe have a special candlelight dinner or go out and have a meal, at the restaurant or celebrate with friends. And these tend to be very small nature of events that we do participate in, host, but we do not realize that obviously it all involves, something called events management, a bit of planning is essentially I would put it across. So I think they are a very key part of our personal life. And then sometimes one of the other things that I can think of is when we recently moved office, we did a bit of an inauguration and also a bit of a cake cutting. And, we started a thing in the office, which is to say that, okay, when some part of our family, staff members have their birthdays, we'll have a cake cutting, on that day within the office. So, this is also a small event, but because it has become something which is going to be a repeated or a repetitive activity across the year, and the time duration of that is not, it could vary. It is not fixed, but it is fixed to an event when it happens on that day, but also not fixed because, these kind of things will happen according to different timelines. They all take the shape and form of some sort of an event or an occasion happening. But in the context of the travel, tourism and hospitality industry, we will call them events. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You tend to agree that, these are the basic definitions that we would probably look at, classifying any sort of an event or, an occasion into, and we class them as probably something called events. So if I take that definition and go forward, part of it we can, as I mentioned, can be defined as, personal events, private events. Sometimes you see that, like for example, the royal wedding which is happening, it's a private occasion, but yet it is going to be broadcasted live on the TV, but some part of it is going to be private celebrations, but it is a very big event. So the royal wedding, which is happening in London this year on the 19th, is in the London events calendar. And this has been in that calendar from the day it was kind of announced. So it's a big event. It's a personal oblique, a private event. You will see that there are different types of categorization that we will do in the industry to kind of look at planning and how these are hosted, planned, and then obviously they would be called as private events, family events. Sometimes it's religious events like christenings that we do. There will be some milestone events like graduation, for example. You guys will be invited to our graduation in the first or second week of July, which is an annual event that we host every year. So it's a milestone event because you've completed some qualifications and achieved your qualifications with us. So you'll be attending a graduation, which is also a kind of an event. We all, I think, I've not recently been to a music concert, but yes, we've all been to music concerts during our teens and our initial years, and that is a great thing that we normally do with friends, outings that we plan, a lot of music concerts that we go to, and this is also a type of event. So there are lots of different types of events. Now, when you call, just to say an example, which is related to the assignment, like a big sporting event, which is like the Commonwealth Games, the London Olympics, which happened in 2012. These are big events which are global events. So we will come to a classification where we'll talk about events which are local, national, and global. But events as a format is very well recognized, and it's not just within this industry that we look at events happening, but events are a way to bring people together, increase revenue. The commercial perspective behind hosting such events, creating such events, is to primarily look at boosting revenue, business, and because we are talking about it within the travel, tourism, and industry, the hospitality industry. We look at it from a point of view of a revenue generator or a piece within this jigsaw puzzle which helps generates revenues. So sometimes you would see that you go on holidays. These holidays tend to be theme holidays, or holidays which basically have events which are crafted, created specifically for you, or just like, for example, I don't know, I'm just going to try and give you a lot of examples which I see on a daily basis as commercials. There is a company called Sandals, which UK advertises exotic holidays. And these holidays are pretty much in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, essentially. So, when they advertise, they also advertise a lifestyle kind of event, which they say that every holiday is special. And within that holiday, they will create events which are going to be looking after your needs and your requirements when you take a holiday with them. So they are I think, from my point of view, they are a very niche kind of an operator, unlike Thompson's or others that we see. But they tend to create memorable events which people would do in terms of holidays, and within those holidays, those occasions which are crafted, which then kind of leave lasting memories. And then one of the biggest that we see in terms of spends happening within the industry is corporate events. You see product launches, you see conferences, you see seminars at a very large scale. If you see politics, the recent, when I say recent, it's now almost coming to 2 years, but when you see the presidential debates happening in the US, and when they were having the primaries, all these were very nicely crafted, very large scale events wherein they had participation from the general public. They were trying to kind of, woo them to get votes, Republicans and Democrat, and then finally culminates into some sort of a big convention. And these conventions were essentially, very large corporate events wherein you have attendance from 30, 40, 50,000 people. Sporting events, when you look at, American baseball, we look at football here in particular, in the Wembley Stadium in London, and we have finals and, Champions League finals, things like that. You see about an attendance of 70, 80, 90,000 people attending those matches. So these are all events, but essentially the bottom line, hosting, planning, and delivering these events is to generate revenue within the industry. So here, each type of event is different, and what you will see is that each event has a clear objective, and they need to be to deliver on those objectives. So when you work within this sector, you will normally see that within a resort or within a particular hotel, you will always have somebody who's holding a separate job role or a position, and that position tends to be of the events manager. So when you look at a hotel, you'll have events like, for example, conferences happening, meetings happening, seminars happening, trainings happening, and they normally tend to happen within the conference halls or, within the large, facilities that most five-star hotels or most hotels they create, even resorts when they create. Because the idea is they want to be able to drive traffic, and there's a very close relationship between travel, tourism, and hospitality sector. And this is also what we'll understand towards the end when we kind of go to the, task 1.3, try to understand what is the relationship between the three and where each of them actually look at working very closely with the events industry to help drive revenue and, increase in footfall when it comes to, tourists or tourism. Okay. Now, let's briefly understand what do you think is the need. I've covered some part of it, but the idea is to roughly now look at pinning down some points specifically to see what is the need to have events or why is event management required. So the basic things that we get to see why these are required is that sometimes when you plan occasions or major gatherings, you will see that in order to give them scale or increase their scope, you have to get into some sort of a managed planning. And that managed planning at some stage will be called events management. So if you're planning say a gathering, you go to a music concert, what you will see is it starts off as at an initial stage of planning saying that, okay, we'll be doing 10-city tour, or, they come up with a proposal. And then when it starts to expand, they start looking at picking up venues which have more capacity, where they will see more, followers coming in or people, fans coming in to attend. where the revenue opportunity will be more. So sometimes you will see that a plan which starts off with a small idea actually gets into a full-fledged event, because the idea there is to increase the scope, increase the size, and also increase the revenues which are going to be generated from that activity.
Okay.
So event management is all about looking at planning, managing, organizing resources in a very systematic manner to make that event successful. You wouldn't want a company launch a product without having that product to be successful. So there is a lot of background preparation which goes in. Look at a simple example that I would say is when the iPhone launch was happening, or the Samsungs when they launched the Galaxy S9. There's a lot of planning which happens behind the scenes. They send out invites. The preparation probably starts 6 to 8 months in advance. They look at the press, the key influential people, bloggers, YouTubers, things like that. And then the venue, which venue is chosen, why is it chosen, and things like that. And then who's going to be the presenter, the slides, what kind of audience will it be. And then to a certain extent, it kind of phases out into a launch event wherein they'll say, okay, first the phones will be available in US, UK, then it'll go to other countries, and then it goes out into a systematic launch plan. So there's a lot of there is a lot of planning happening, but this is because this series of tasks that they undertake cascades into a full-fledged activity or a rollover in terms of a plan, and is also very synonymous to saying that, okay, it's an event, it's a big time thing which will happen once and won't be happening again. So the iPhone 10, when it was launched, or iPhone X as when it was launched, there's only one launch event for that. Now, you would not want that event or that occasion or that time coming again, and that is why it is termed as event. And in order to make it successful, a lot of planning needs to go about, needs to happen. That planning needs to happen to make it, go flawlessly and, go as per plan, as clockwork, to make sure that it is successful. So the main point here on this slide that I'm trying to put across is there is an importance of, event within this sector, and that is to give it scale, size, and also boost revenues. You will see another example which I'll give you from this industry, which I can think of personally that I've been to, is going to Disneyland with kids. Now, Disneyland is a resort, and they have to have activities planned out throughout the year, whether it's summer, winter, autumn, rain, whatever it is. Whatever season of the year, whatever the season, whatever time of the year, they need to plan a lot of activities to attract visitors to come to that, tourist destination. And the way it is done is that they plan a lot of events around the launch of a movie, the launch of new characters you would do, and things like that. And that is where that draws crowds coming to that particular destination. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've kind of, mentioned one of the key things when you look at events would be that you're looking at revenue. A resort looks at, a promotional activity. Say, for example, they're going to come out with summer promotions to get their rooms sold out or the capacity sold out. And what they will do is they'll create an event around sales and marketing to say, that's the offer we're going to give you. Buy 3 nights, the 4th night is free, or, some sort of an offer wherein they say, example, sticking to Disneyland, you book tickets for 7 days, kids go free, or, you are half paid in terms of the meals are free or things like that. And the reason why they do it is, the reason behind, it's not difficult to understand, the reason behind this is economics, which is that they want to make sure that they are able to maximize revenue, get you engaged more and more within the resort or the destination so that you spend more. Another example which I'll give you is of casinos. When you go to, say, destinations which are famously known for, casinos, like Las Vegas, for example. I don't know in terms of in Europe, but normally people will go across to some destinations wherein in the Far East, it's Macau, for example. And when you look at that, there the idea is that they have to have these events happening or activities happening on a daily basis, which basically kind of, motivate tourists and visitors to stay within the venue so that they are able to you are able to spend more and more around those activities which are happening. And those are also then termed as, events. So there's a special of the day, which is there in most of these destinations. And the idea is they want to get more and more of your money to be spent within the destination rather than you going out. So economically, some of these events, when they are planned, they might have short-term effects and long-term effects. If I take the example of Disney again, Disneyland Paris, I think they've completed 25 years now. So they are doing a large celebration around that event. Now, because this is a milestone which they've reached, this milestone cannot be reached again and again. So what they want to do is they put in a lot of planning to try and get a long-term economic impact of this. And from that perspective, sometimes when you see hotels being made, they have break even, or when they plan large investments into hotels, 5-star hotels, 6-star hotels, 7-star hotels, they will typically have a long-term economic plan to recover that money which has been invested. And in order to recover that money, they plan something on a calendar basis, a lot of micro activities or events which will help them recoup that revenue back which has been invested into those projects. Yes, Antonio, you were saying something.
Yeah, I was saying that the event itself could be posed as a tourist attraction.
That is
so that's
correct.
25. Yeah, that's 25 years event that they're going to be holding. That and all would be like a tourist attraction for both children and adults as well. So they could look at it as that too.
Absolutely. So in terms of the advantages of having these activities is that they would also, as you rightly said, appeal to a large segment, whether it's kids, adults, whatever. So the idea would be to try and make sure that they are able to, go across with something which appeals to all types of demographics or all types of, age groups within that to be able to maximize revenue. So in general, what we want to be able to understand is there is a need for events within this sector because they want to bring in regular revenues, have activities and occasions which keep the business going, gets tourists in, there's an engagement, and then there are economic effects, which is short-term and long-term. Some of them can be short-term because when you look at certain destinations, you will see, when you look at, say, Thailand, for example, which is all year round, tourism. Dubai, for example, when you look at, is now transforming its economy in such a way that they have pretty much everything in terms of trying to promote tourism all the year round. Cities like London, when you look at mega cities like London, Los Angeles, New York, Paris, they have a calendar which basically has events all year long. And the reason why they want to bring these, have these events all year long is they want to see a multiplier effect that, sometimes you will see tourists coming in to see a destination, but if you've been to London a couple of times, you've seen the Big Ben, you've seen the London Eye, you've seen this, you've seen that, you would want to go to those destinations again. Or what will happen is you go across to the local activities or events which are happening in that city, which could be like the Chelsea Flower Show, for example, new things that you would want to try out. So sometimes they are also a precursor to what you will see is that in order to re-engage with the tourist and invite them back to the destination, these events have to be created and they could have short-term, long-term effects. So money is, invested by government, for example, in policy strategies, strategic objectives that they want to create London as a mega city or, have this in London, like the development of Shard, which has happened, Canary Wharf, which has happened. These are developments which have happened, keeping in mind long-term economic impact, that people will want to come in, they would want to visit these destinations, and this is where it will bring in money, overseas investment, and also help in the development of infrastructure within that city.
Yeah.
So they have short-term and long-term impact. Now, let's look at from a different perspective. We've understood reason, we've understood why, we've understood the economic impact. Let's understand the cultural significance. Now, sometimes you will see that some of these events have, cultural significances because they are related directly or indirectly to a particular segment of people or, demographics within that kind of, geography. So when you look at UK in particular, we see a lot of events which happen, which are now part and parcel of our calendar, like, for example, the celebration of the Chinese New Year. Now, This is also a major event which has direct cultural impact, and the Chinese New Year celebrations happen pretty much across every city. We see that in Liverpool, Manchester, London, a lot of other places wherein you will see these celebrations happening, because it kind of helps engage with the community, brings in diversity, and also shows a multicultural aspect of the society within that geography, city, whatever it is. And sometimes indirect cultural impacts which also affect events, and they are of significance, is because when events like the Commonwealth Games, the Olympics, and things like that, there's a bidding which happens for it, because the governments do see an economic as well as the cultural impact of that, because they see a lot of influx of tourists coming into the country, different things happening, infrastructure development happening, and they then also tend to contribute towards having an impact on the culture. So that would mean that you will get to see probably, a simple reason which I would put it is that, okay, the Olympics were happening in London in 2012. I got to see some of my cousins coming in, which have never, they didn't plan to come down to UK for a number of years. But they came and they said, okay, we'll come and visit you. We'll also see the Olympics. And that's what essentially happened. So it's an indirect impact of a large event like Olympics, which kind of brings societies together or brings people together. And that is where you also see a bit of a indirect, impact happening because of the events happening in that city or in that location. Sometimes you kind of prepone some events or postpone certain events depending on the event calendar or the diary of that, calendar of that event. So, they said, okay, we'll be visiting such and such because of a marriage or because of an occasion. But just because the Olympics are happening, they said, okay, while we are there, we'll obviously come in this year rather than a year before or after. And that, is basically an indirect effect. Now, some part of it is also due to some event planning also happens, at the national level, local level, national level, and global level. And this is primarily because of activities which are synchronized with the government or between the public and the private sector. Now, because this is a revenue generating activity, there is a lot of policy initiative which happens from the government to be able to invite or develop tourism or, activity within the tourism hospitality sector. So what we do get to see is sometimes you will see the G7 event, the G20 event, which is hosted by a particular country. And the idea of hosting that event within a particular country by one of the nations is to again bring in, strategic investment or, some sort of, let's put it this way, a boost into the economy. So sometimes you will see that events are also utilized by government and the private sector on a very large strategic basis. And these are done again to kind of, let's say, roll over or make a start towards policy initiatives which the government would like to put at the local, regional, and the national level. So an example of this would be the cultural city of the year, which is normally, every year in the European Union, there's a competition which gets held, and a lot of councils and cities actually participate to become the cultural city of the year. So in the last couple of years, Liverpool in the UK has been chosen as one of the cultural city of the year. I think this year is going to be Hull. So after a number of years, number of councils and cities go in with this bid, and the idea is they want to kind of talk about their history, their culture, and also generate a lot of hype, which then leads to event planning and then tourism activity happening in that location. And this is more of a government-led strategic initiative to kind of, give a local boost to the economy of that city. And that is where that competition which has been created to become the European Cultural City of the Year. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think 2 or 3 cities have won it in the last, 10 years in the UK, including Liverpool. So some of these activities do have a significance from a point of view of strategic initiatives which are done by the government, but the investment pours into the private sector to be able to generate business within travel, tourism, and hospitality sector. Now, after having understood, the overarching objectives of the learning outcome 1, which is understanding the different kinds of event, when they happen, what are the bearings of these events, and how they are planned, and what is the relevance of these events. Let's look at looking at some of the slides which are directly related to some of the tasks. Now, one of the tasks which in this learning outcome talks about is it says classify small, large, hallmark, and mega events. So let's look at briefly understanding, what is event size. Sometimes you classify events on the basis of, the number of audience it will attract, the revenue it will, help collate, in terms of what is the kind of activity it will help drive. And these could be events which is what we term as something called mega events. So like if you imagine in the UK, we have Premier League, but the, Premier League, there are lots of matches. There are about, I think, 28 teams. Each team plays about 30 matches. But the culmination of that could be, because it's happening within UK only, it is that at the end of the season, one of the teams primarily is crowned as Premier League champion. But if I extrapolate that into a Europa League or the Champions League, which is the matches which happen between different clubs within Europe, within football, what you'll get to see is the finals of either a Champions League or a Europa League actually become a mega event, and that is hosted within a particular city. An example of a mega event is obviously like Olympics that we see, the Winter Olympics or the Summer Olympics as we call it, the FIFA World Cup. These are mega events because they draw a large audience. You will see a large sway of, supporters actually traveling to support their teams in these matches or in these events. So that is where there is that is why these events are called mega events, because they generate a lot of publicity, revenue, interest from not just the local public but also across countries, because it travels across geographies or travel across boundaries. Then we look at something called hallmark events. Now, I'm going to go on to the other events, but obviously looking at some of the terms which primarily would have come across, as you would have come across as first time. Now, hallmark events are held, which are held within the same location every year, right? Now, I wouldn't call the royal wedding as a hallmark event because it is can be classified as a hallmark event because it happens only once, probably in a lifetime. But because it does not happen in the same
every
location,
time.
does not happen every time, I cannot call it a hallmark event. But to a certain extent, I will still call it a hallmark event because it happens. The main ceremony actually happens in the Westminster Abbey. That is where all royal marriages have happened over the years, and all royals have got married, or the whole ceremony thing has happened there. So it is, when I say a hallmark destination, it would be the difference between happening, time and again, and that destination or that location being hallmark, and that is why it's chosen. So Westminster Abbey would be, a hallmark destination, but that event might not be classified as a hallmark event altogether. Hallmark event which becomes synonymous with location. So you would recall the location rather than recall the event. So an example here would be when we look at, for example, certain festivals which happen in locations like, I don't know, Chelsea, would you recall this, say, or have you been, so when we talk about Glastonbury, this particular location is synonymous with an event which happens every year, same time, in the same location, but, and you have lots of people which come across. So it's a hallmark event in the calendar of, when we look at music festivals or gatherings. So when you look at that, typically you will see this is a hallmark event because it is in all the calendars across all the various publications, because this is a big event which happens and it attracts large crowds. So when we look at such events, we will call them as hallmark events, and they are primarily because the location is of the significance. Now, after having understood definitions of mega and hallmark events, let's look at major events. Events which can generate large media coverage, could have economic benefits, could have lots of visitors coming in, could be termed as major events. And these are, shorter in duration. So, for example, when we look at the Chelsea Flower Show, for example, it happens over a period of time. The flower show is open for a period of a month, but because it generates significant number of crowd and a lot of media coverage, it is a major event in the London calendar of events which happens across the year. And then you have minor events which are basically community-led or, a certain sector-led events which are having both social, cultural, and entertainment purposes. And they could be something which we talk about, for example, say, for example, the let me think of an example here specific to the UK, and so I won't call minor events are events which typically would be, say, a good example that I can think of now is, when you look at bank holiday sales, these are minor events because it's a bank holiday. There's a small event which will happen. Sales will happen. Essentially, a lot of retailers will put out sales. Or, for example, when the when you have a short break coming in within the schools, which is midterm, you will see some packages, holiday packages, and things like that going out from major providers, tourist operators, and they tend to be minor events because they are only there for a smaller duration of time. But the idea is they want to increase revenue. They want to make sure that they are able to get sales or get the customers to come in and spend, and that is where they will class these events as what you call minor events. Because these events happen at a shorter duration, but create a bit of a surge in the revenue, but also, kind of generate, let's put it this way, a bit of publicity, they would be classed as, something called minor events. The other thing that I can think of is if there is a Harry Potter, for example, which I know for sure Chelsea would relate to. If you look at Harry Potter, movie, which are minor, which are events which are created because a new sequel which is coming in or a launch of a new book is happening, and that team seems to be, like a minor event. A major event in Europe, which is also, I would say, the tourist has a tourist value, attraction in terms of tourist value and attraction would be the Cannes Film Festival. Now that happens over a period of time. It will be for a couple of days, but that is where the jury will look at a lot of movies coming across from international destinations, look at, awards and things like that. But that is also a major event which happens within the particular film and music industry, as we call it, predominantly the film industry. Let's look at classifying the events very briefly. So we've looked at sporting events, entertainment, music festivals. You look at art and cultural events, family events. These are different type of events. I think there's a large categorization, and what I've done is I've pulled that across in one of the slide notes for you to have a look at. But events, pretty much, I have seen can be classed across these major categories, and within each of these categories, you'll have another 10, 15 different type of events. So in the family events, I could have a marriage event, I could have an anniversary event, a birthday event. In the corporate events, you can have loads of different types. You could have loads of different type of corporate events, and they could be, seminars, conferences, product launch, and things like that. And we'll get into a bit more detail with this. Now, each of this type of event primarily poses challenges, and they need to be planned quite well to be able to be executed so that they achieve their end objective. So here, the idea of understanding now would be to class them into three different types. What are local events, national events, and global events, and how they correlate to the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. Now, what we've seen over the years is that a lot of things are happening in each country, and because of three reasons. One, increasing population, increasing economic prosperity, and the cost of travel decreasing over the years. What we've seen is tourism as a activity, as a social, as a leisure activity has increased over the years. So this is one sector which is showing phenomenal growth year on year and does not seem to be slowing down. This is a potentially the largest employer of people across the globe, and it is the biggest sector in terms of generating revenue. So when we look at that, there is a clear advantage at all levels to classify activities or events into three types: local, national, global. And the idea is always to engage, increase, and obviously get more revenue by connecting or creating these events, and bringing larger and larger people or audiences to participate in that. And what we do get to see, one of the important things which is happening now is with the advent of technology, some of these events can now be broadcasted live. You can pretty much be present in an event, and you can be tweeting, posting. You could be consuming, creating information, sitting miles and miles away, but somebody else in a different location is actually subscribed and is getting all of that information, which then can be published and provided in real time to larger audiences to generate excitement, to a certain extent, revenue, and also to create, potential business. And this is why when we look at planning of global events, or if I just pick up one like Olympic Games, if I just stick to that, what you will see is the planning for this every 4 years. It happens in a different country, in a different location, and what you will see is there's a lot of planning which starts to go into this, and the annual calendar at which most countries actually, put in a bid for hosting the Olympics is, 10 years ahead. So next Olympics is happening in Japan. Next after that has also been awarded, I think, to either Los Angeles or Paris, if I can remember correctly. Between the two, they were the two last cities, and after that there'll be a bid. So 8 years in advance, there's a lot of, bidding going on to ensure that there's enough excitement, curiosity, and preparation which can go in to make these events successful. So when you look at planning, you look at engaging with audiences within the sector of travel, tourism, and hospitality. We classify events as local, national, and global. And every tourist operator, every hotel, every restaurant, every kind of business involved in this sector then buys into, or kind of tries to get a slot into any of the three calendars. If you're a local restaurant in the city of London, you'll probably try and participate in the local calendar. If you're a hotel chain which has hotels across, various cities in the UK and also across, for example, different countries, you'll get into each of the national calendars. And then some chains which are very large, like Intercontinental, you look at Hilton, you look at Marriott, they then play across global calendars for all the countries to be able to synchronize with those events to draw an audience and draw in business. Is that point clear?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Very briefly, this is something which we'll cover, in a learning outcome 3 on its own, and it's quite a big, part of the events management, syllabus that we're going to study. But basically, MICE as a term, is very synonymous with meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions. And we will understand this in a greater detail, but it is imperative for us to understand that these are also events. When we look at talking about corporate events in particular, you will see most corporate events actually revolve around something called MICE. And this is the scale of these events are so big, and the revenue they generate is so big that they are classed as a separate industry within the travel, tourism, and hospitality sector, because they tend to drive business, hotels, ancillary industry which are involved with hotels, and also directly with tourism and hospitality. So we'll come to these in learning outcome 3, but it's important to understand when we talk about events and we talk about corporate events, these 4 are in a category of their own: meetings, incentives, conventions, gathering, and they are the largest contributor of revenue, because most event management on the corporate side happens to be focused on these kind of things. So when you look at London, I'm forgetting the name of the convention center, but just outside East London, there is a large convention center which can host up to 33,000 conferences under one roof. Wow. And it can take 1.3 million visitors at any given point in time in convention. And that venue has a concentration of about, I think, 17 to 19 hotels with 500 room capacity. So when you get conventions happening, the rate at the hotel for a room overnight jumps to about $200 to $300 pounds a night. But when the convention is happening, you see the room rate for a hotel like Hilton drops to about 45 for an overnight stay. So we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in learning outcome 3, but it's good to keep in mind that when we talk about events, MICE is the single largest revenue driver for corporate events when we talk about events management within the sector.
Okay.
Very briefly, looking at learning out, task 1.2, it says describe the characteristics of different type of events. Now, what I've done here is in the footnotes, I put in all the types of events, put in some definitions. I'm not going to go into a bit more detail, but you can go through this, and they're quite simple to understand. We are looking at talking about the definition of the type of events. So when we say what is a conference under corporate events, this is the type of event which happens when we look at corporate events in general, and this is you will see that a lot of people come together, and a company would host this as a conference. It could be an annual general conference or a meeting conference for investors. It could be a customers forum that they could do, but it happens at a large scale, normally in a hotel, and the audience is minimum between 250 to 300, in some cases as large as 1500 to 2000 as well. So different types of events is what we want to understand, and what are the occasions at which this events actually happens. One of the other things that you look at is sometimes corporate events also holding, golf events or press conferences or product launches. So an example that I gave earlier was of Apple, wherein we saw that when the iPhone 10 was launched, it was a press conference come a product launch, which the company hosts maybe once in 2 years or once in 18 months. But it's a very large event, and this type of event has closed invitations to only press people within the industry. And the idea is they want to kind of bring out the concept and the product in front of the world. And that is why it's a product launch followed by a press conference. So this is a kind of event, and what we want to be able to do at this stage is for task 1.2, understand the different kinds of events and at what time they happen and what is the significance of these events. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, good stuff. Now, I've got an infographics which I'm going to try and show full screen. This kind of summarizes the events industry in the UK. And this is something which I've taken from Eventbrite, which is a website in the UK which you can buy tickets from essentially for any type of event which is happening in the UK. It could be music concerts, and I bought a lot of tickets from there, training conferences, things like that. Now, just to look at numbers, on the left-hand side first, this industry in the UK alone is £42.3 billion annually in terms of turnover. So the size of this industry and the revenue it generates gives you an idea that it is a major employer as far as people employed are concerned within this sector. When you're studying and taking this course, events management itself will be a major within this sector.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, even attendees spend on an average £65,000 in registration fees annually, just in the UK. The top 10 UK event agencies turnover is 3.5 billion. So there are lots of event agencies which work with hotels, restaurants, and different, players within the industry, resorts and things like that. And they create specific events to bring audiences in. They are the idea generation machine. And these top agencies in the UK have a turnover of more than £3.5 billion. The average budget which is spent on doing an event is about £65,000. So as you can see, any activity, it does not specify an activity by a hotel or a music concert or a restaurant or a hotel, whatever it is. But in general, what they've done is they've said, okay, there are so many events which happen across the year in the UK. Every event, the average cost is about 65,000. So there's a lot at stake when a company spends big, small, large. When they spend this much amount of money, there's a lot riding on to make that successful. Now, there are in the UK, as per last year, about 500,000 people employed just in the events industry directly. And then 35% of the events which happen in the UK actually drive tourists to major cities or major locations or venues in the United Kingdom. So this goes to show that how important it is as a revenue generator, as a contributor of revenue to the travel tourism industry in the United Kingdom. Now, London is the #1 destination for meeting and events activity in Europe. So it is the most famous city where most of the events happen, and that's why some of the infrastructure in the city of London is geared to be able to host a lot of corporate events or MICE essentially, and that's why it comes or takes the #1 spot as far as the city is concerned. Now, there are over 10,000 venues in the UK to host events, and they have a capacity of over 85 million if they're all put together, just to get some statistics. And there are 1.3 million business events which are happening every year in the UK. So this industry is also growing at 83%, and then 67% of organizers expect that they will have more visitors coming to the event next year. That means in 2018, 2019. So these are some statistics just to give you some overarching view of, the events industry and how it contributes towards, how it plays its part towards the, THM sector. So when we look at characterization of events, there are lots of events which we do outdoor. There are lots of charity events which also happen. There are exhibition and trade fairs which happen. There are conferences, and then we have music festival and concerts, which also are very large events in which it generates a lot of money. So this is a breakup of the revenue, which 42 billion in terms of the revenue which it generates. Let's look at the last bit, which is understanding in terms of what is the significant relationship between tourism, hospitality, and events management. Do you think that these are three different terms and three different terms which come together in this sector, or what is your understanding of this?
For me, I think that they are interrelated. They are all interrelated because tourism and hospitality activities, you are seeing events in both sectors or both subsectors. So I think that tourism, hospitality, and events, they are all in one. For me, they are interrelated.
Absolutely. Chelsea, any thoughts from your end?
No, I agree with what she said.
Right, okay. So this point, obviously you've covered it well. They are all interrelated concepts, but what we need to be able to do is understand their definitions in as individuals. So when we look at tourism, when we look at when do we call it hospitality, and when do we say events management, they are terms which are very interchangeably used within this sector. So let's understand hospitality. Now, when we look at, when we use the word tourist, what we want to be able to look at is that when you're traveling as a tourist or you're going to a destination, your main aim is the reason why you've chosen that destination, that you've heard good reviews or you read good reviews, you've had good instances of people talking about it, and in general the reason why that has happened is because once you visited that destination or that holiday spot, you would have, or your friends, family members, whatever you've heard that from wherever you've heard these things from, they've had very good experience in terms of hospitality. That means they've received good service. The service which they've received was meeting the expectation or exceeding their expectation, and that is where the concept of hospitality comes across. So hospitality is looking about you. It's basically all about you having good service, you having a good experience, and then you are, because you've had that good service and good experience which met your expectation, you then start to recommend that location to your friends and family, and you want to come back to that destination again. So the concept of hospitality is receiving the service when we talk about in this definition. Is that okay?
Yeah.
An example that I've given in this slide is that when you go and stay in a particular hotel, you use a public transport, or for example, the use of Uber or taxi sharing service, restaurants in a particular location. When you go, you tend to see that if these services have been meeting your expectation, what you're generally content with is when you get that short feedback survey or a questionnaire to be asked to be filled up when you're leaving the hotel or you're checking out, you tend to give 4 or 5 stars is because 4s or 5s or stars is because you're generally happy with the experience that you've had. So that concept is all about the concept of hospitality. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we look at the concept of tourism, what we are looking at is hospitality complements tourism, is because if you had good service, what tends to happen is you then think of coming back to that destination again or recommending that destination spot, whatever it is, to somebody in your friends, families, whatever, and that basically tends to spread through word of mouth. And because you've had that good experience, what tends to happen is it generally promotes a feeling of well-being, which then tends to promote tourism. So sometimes people say is that, you over the years, people travel quite a lot now. So has it happened that you've been to a destination again? You've gone back for holiday to that destination again. Has that happened with you?
Yes.
Chelsea, yourself?
No, but I would like to, yes.
Right, okay. So, in the initial years as we travel, what we do is we want to travel to new places and new destinations because we want to see new places or, experience new cultures and meet new people. But at some stage when this is a survey which was done in the paper, which was done by Stepanek and Stojanov, they basically came across with the idea that when you look at people and if they have had an experience of traveling for 10, 15, 20 years, what you do tend to see is that they tend to go across to a destination after a number of years because what they do see is that they have received good service, they've had good memories or experiences, and if they have to pick and choose a destination, given a chance, they will choose a destination wherein this has been the core of their experience. Good hospitality, maybe both in terms of economics. So when you look at tourism, it's all about economics. They would have found the holiday to be more economical or, fitting their budget and something that everybody enjoyed. And that is where they tend to pick those destinations. So when you're in your 50s and 60s, what they've done is a survey which basically found out that if you've been to a number of destinations over the years, 20, 30, 40, whatever, you tend to choose the same destinations again to visit at a later stage wherein you had good experiences. So hospitality and tourism complement, and they are absolutely interrelated, and they kind of, work together.
Yeah.
That concept, if we marry with events management plays a very important role within the tourism and hospitality industry. And the simple reason to that is that events actually make those experiences memorable.
Yes.
Or those destinations that you go to more attractable as compared to others, right? So you will see that people travel to Disneyland after about 7 to 10 years. If they've been to Disneyland once, they tend to come back after 7 to 10 years. And this is a lot of research which Disneyland itself has done with the number of visitors it's had over the years. And what they see in the franchise is that 7 to 10 years down the line, people tend to come back because their situations have changed. They came in probably as kids, and now they've had kids, so they want to come with kids or grandparents and things like that. So events management plays a very important role to complement, travel within the tourism and hospitality sector. And this is what they have said is that sometimes, and I give you an example, that if you visited London a number of times, what will happen is you will come back to London not just to visit the same spots or attractions again, but you might come into when you are a regular, as they say, are you a regular to London or are you a Londoner? What will happen is you will basically go down and participate in the local attractions or events which are happening to increase your knowledge about the culture and the people you meet. So that is the real significance of looking at events and how it stitches into the tourism and hospitality sector. So here, the strategy which most businesses use to bring back tourists and the visitors to the same destination is they use the strategy of creating events to bring them back to increase revenue and obviously engage with them again. So tourist operators are a key part to promote and use this particular tool within the sector, which is events management. So you will see Thomson's, Expedia, a lot of these large operators, Jet2 Holidays in the UK, they tend to kind of always have events in these destinations. And the adverts that you see on television when they kind of promote, they are all around an event, a family, a celebration, a collection of a family or, family getting together, and they create an event around that where they try and promote a tourist destination. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think coming to, the conclusion on learning outcome 1, what we do get to see, these 3 concepts are very different, but they are interrelated and they are used interrelatedly to try and promote tourism and tourism related activity within the sector. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And it is important for us to understand that events from a corporate perspective, when we talk about MICE, is one of the largest generator of revenues, largest generator of, driving traffic into a particular destination, either for tourism or for business or personal, reasons or, purposes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think that brings me to the end of what I wanted to cover in Learning Outcome 1. And I hope it has given you some sort of a good understanding in terms of what we look at and what we mean by events. What role does it play? Events management as a topic, it plays in the travel, tourism, and industry, hospitality sector or industry, and then the types of events, and what is the relationship between these three terms when we look at them independently, but obviously they are interrelated. And events in general is used by the tourism and hospitality sector to drive traffic, drive revenue, drive visitors, and to re-engage with tourists and audiences to bring them back to a particular destination.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on this so far?
I haven't got any.
No questions.
So I'm going to try and end the session here today. This presentation I have put onto Moodle, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to also send you a small handout for you to read, and that handout will help you firm up this concept that we've studied today with regards to understanding events, types of events, the scale of events, and what is the relationship between tourism, hospitality, and events.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay? Good stuff.
Yeah.
I'll catch up with you on next Saturday, same time, and we'll get on with Learning Outcome 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
You.
Take
Same
care.
to you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.